Chapter 841 Large-Scale Massacre of the Demon Race. When Xietain arrived in front of the throne room, he found that the double wooden door was closed, and even the two soul evolvers who usually stood at the entrance as guardians were nowhere to be seen. It seemed that just as the pretty maid from earlier had told him, the situation was quite serious. The doors creaked softly as Xietain pushed inside, opening without any hindrance whatsoever. The existences already inside the throne room stopped all conversation as the doors creaked slightly before opening. Several eyes fell upon Xietain from the first instant he set foot inside the room. Seraphina, Ellis, Liam, Anna, Giles, General Lazes, the young and timid assassin Cat, and approximately a dozen other people who were part of the most powerful soul evolvers in all of the Gale's kingdom were inside the room. The Third Order Snake, Mei Lin, was also present in her human form, and even Zillig was inside the room despite his height, thanks to the fact that the corridors and doors of the castle were exaggeratedly large, not to mention the distance between the floor and the ceiling. The two kings of their respective races within their respective territories had stayed in the castle for the past week and did not leave at all. According to them, the reason they were staying was so they could better discuss alliance matters. But Xietain was beginning to suspect that Mei Lin enjoyed the high-quality service that the human maids could provide in contrast to the rough service of the mutant beasts, while Xilong was like a perverted old man looking at the girls walking past him even though he never did anything bad. "Xietain, you're finally here." King Philip nodded with a serious expression and made a gesture with his hand. "Sit down first, we were waiting for you." The atmosphere was really serious and even heavy. Xietain nodded silently and sat down on one of the chairs that had been placed on the sides. Seraphina and Ellis had saved one for him, casually in between the two sisters. "Now that we are all here, I want to announce a very important piece of news I received today morning, but waited until now to tell you since I wanted to confirm the truthfulness first, even though the source is very reliable," King Philip said as he pulled out a small device with a second-order soul stone embedded in it. Ellis leaned slightly closer to Xietain and explained in a whisper, "That is a device that allows two or more existences to communicate regardless of distance as long as it is within our world. It also has the ability to store messages. Only nobles of great prestige from families that once had a powerful warrior or soul evolvers above level 70 can afford such a device, because only a second-order soul stone is able to feed its hunger for no more than 20 uses before it crumbles to dust. These are the devices that allow news to spread quickly throughout the world." Xietain nodded silently and thanked her with his eyes. King Philip injected his mana and the soul stone immediately lit up. Several magical runes glowed on the small fist-sized device, and soon, two voices came from inside the unit. "Fucking fiend, you and your race will pay for this. Scum who won't even spare newborns." "Heh, is that so? Who will be the one to make us pay though? Are they the kings of the kingdom that you humans are so proud of? Ha ha ha, laughable. I'm in 8th place among His Majesty's demon generals, but I alone was enough to kill that old thing without much trouble. Shit, I forgot his name even though I absorbed his records. Just die already, second-order trash." A sound of something breaking was heard from the device, followed by something falling to the ground with a thud. Then, the demon's voice was heard again. Humans, you have no idea what awaits for you." Then, the sound of footsteps got farther and farther away until the lights on the device went out and there was no more sound. The faces of some people like Seraphina and Anna had turned pale at the sound of the demon's voice. As for the rest, their expressions were either ugly or anger-filled as they understood what the recorded message represented. After a moment of silence, King Philip said in a deep voice, "The scout was a level 67 soul evolver affiliated to the Prowling Kingdom. Queen Eloise received the scout's call just when he had already been captured by the demon general. He probably did it to pass on the information before he died. The Prowling Kingdom sent the same message to all the 48 kingdoms on foot. I confirmed it personally." Ella's expression was serious and her beautiful face was slightly wrinkled by her frown. "Father, let me see if I understood correctly, but does this mean that the culprits of the fall of the Syrian kingdom are none other than the demons? That demon said to be in the 8th position among the demon lords, demons general, if I'm not mistaken, the 8th demon general is called Arath. The demons are definitely behind the destruction of the Syrian kingdom and the massacre of more than 17 million humans. However, it was not Arath who defeated the Syrian king." King Philip shook his head without any doubt on his face. 17 million humans. Xietain subconsciously clenched his fist tightly and gritted his teeth until they gnashed. Xietain annihilated his enemies to leave no possible future retaliation. However, the demons were clearly killing humans for another kind of incentive and were not doing it for survival. Besides, while he knew it was hypocritical to feel this way when he had killed so many innocents, Xietain did not feel good knowing that another race was slaughtering his own cold-bloodedly, even if he was not a human of this world. Moreover, Xietain was open to get the wrath of an avenger who would rise up to punish him for his actions. Therefore, the demons should also be open to feel his wrath. It was only fair. The fist of the strongest was the only real ruler that existed. Ellis glanced sideways at Xietain, feeling his anger. She patted his shoulder gently under Seraphina's not-so-kind eyes as she asked in a serious voice, "Father, how are you so sure that Arath was not the one who killed the king of Xietain? Demon generals might have a lower average level than kingdom kings, but they can all leap levels to fight against stronger soul evolvers." King Philip looked at Xietain even though it was Ellis who asked the question and said in a firm voice, "The king of the Xietain kingdom was a powerful mage with 90% of his skills focused on the pure water demon element. But the general demon Arath is a mage who uses cursed fire skills. It is well known by natural laws that fire cannot defeat Wate, therefore, it is absolutely impossible for the king of Xietain to fall against Arath in a 1 versus 1 combat, definitely not." Xietain narrowed his eyes and said in a cold voice, "That demon general whatever his name was is trying to hide something. Queen Eloise and I think the same thing." King Philip nodded and said in a deep voice, "However, what would a demon general want to hide? Another demon general? I doubt it, such a thing doesn't make much sense." "Demon Lord," Xietain said without hesitation. The Demon King was the one who killed the king of the Xietain kingdom fast enough so that the latter didn't even have a chance to send a message to the other kingdoms, while his generals were the ones who took it upon themselves to wipe out all human life in the various cities and towns of the kingdom. The entire room fell under a stony silence as Xietan's words echoed inside the throne room. It was as if for a few seconds everyone held their breath before King Philip finally broke that silence in a serious voice filled with murderous intent. "My exact thoughts," the king nodded with anger and thirst for revenge burning in his eyes. "That damned beast of the demon race finally came out. His wife, the one woman he had loved and the one existence he had been willing to marry to start a family with, had been killed by one of the demon generals under the demon lord's command. Although the demon general Belgos, guilty of Queen Helena's death, had already been killed by King Philip with the help of Xietain, the king was not satisfied and wanted the head of the real culprit, the leader of the one who killed his beloved." "That's good too." Xietain nodded and stood up while saying coolly, "While we're at it, we might as well annihilate all the demons." The faces of Ellis, Seraphina, Anna, Giles, Kat, Evan, Liam, and all the younger ones who were not used to large-scale massacres involving millions of lives turned slightly pale as murderous intent leaked from Xietan's words. He didn't realize it, but the moment those words came out of his mouth, the skill Lonely Wolf aura was half activated, therefore, the blurred image of a crimson wolf appeared behind him. However, unlike in the past, the crimson wolf was no longer on all fours but was standing like a human. This was because the skill Lonely Wolf aura had evolved. A/N, Chapter 819, just in case. But, annihilate all the demons? Seraphina looked at Xietain with hesitant eyes and said in a low voice, "If we do that, what would make us different from them?" Zillig looked at Seraphina out of the corner of his eye and said loudly, "Gale's girl, you are too soft." Mei Lin said nothing, but it was clear from the way she shook her head that she did not see the second princess's words in a good light. Xietain looked at Seraphina and said calmly, "Ponytails, I think you are misunderstanding something? Since the soul record linked us all within its web, there is no such thing called difference. Demon or human, mutant beast or orc, we are all the same, we kill to live and devour to grow. Fight, win, evolve, simple as that. Since demons are cruel, then there is no need to show them mercy." He looked at King Philip and after a short pause continued, "Besides, I have already slaughtered over 2 million demons that lived in the center of the forest of the ancients. Elder or child, not one was left behind the day Her Majesty Helena fell on the battlefield." Everyone's hearts were shaken this time, and even the second-order generals who had made it to that stage by slaughtering countless enemies and fighting for at least 100 years looked at Xietain in shock. Seraphina and Ellis looked at Xietan's back with pale faces, neither of them said anything. "Your Majesty, do you remember our deal from before?" Xietain asked as he looked the king straight in the eyes. King Philip nodded, "I do remember, of course, I do remember. At that time I said that if the demon race didn't get involved then I would let them be, but now I have to take back that line," he said in a cold voice. "Even though the demon's actions don't affect neither me nor you at the moment, leaving this kind of bloodthirsty enemy alive is no different than releasing a tiger into the mountains. It will eventually come back to hunt us." Before the king could say anything, Zillig interjected, Hey, Xietain boy. Aren't you getting too far ahead of yourself? I know you're strong enough to break my jade skin. However, the demon lord is at a different level. What happened this time could have been his revenge for what happened in the forest of the ancients. Maybe he will stop here since pressuring all the human kingdoms won't do him any good either and he knows it. We better stop stirring up the hornet's nest before we get bitten to death. I'm not asking for your help, don't worry, Zillig. Xietain replied calmly. He looked at the green orc and said slowly, our alliance will only be until we reach the treasure and get it secured, then we will be enemies, and probably only one of us will make it out alive, won't we? There is only one treasure after all, and I don't think you want to share it. Zillig simply looked at him silently, he said nothing. His silence tactfully was a positive nod to Xietan's words. The atmosphere cooled a bit when the words that none of the four involved in the alliance had wanted to mention so far. After a few seconds, Mei Lin let out a chuckle that caused a white mist to leak out of her half-open mouth as she said with narrowed eyes, well, it's most probable that the demon lord will show up to fight for the treasure, so let's all dance together to death and let the ultimate winner grant the fallen allies a good burial. Xietain looked at Mei Lin, she looked at him too. He smiled slightly and said calmly, yeah, let's dance to death. Chapter 842 Kali Mysterious Object in Seoul. So, is this where your friend you told me about earlier lives? Xietain stopped in front of a very plain-looking wooden door in the easternmost part of Bearcrest City where the most ordinary citizens resided, those who not only did not have enough ability or bravery to risk their lives and fight to the death or whose lineages had never produced a soul evolver powerful enough for their descendants to enjoy the privileges of their success. Orc. If I were you I wouldn't underestimate this little wooden door in front of us. Seraphina said as she let out a giggle like that of a naughty little devil. Both she and Xietain were covered by long black cloaks to hide their figures. Both of them were simply too popular because of the status they had and what their names represented, therefore, it was impossible to leave the castle in peace unless they were covered like this. Although there were occasionally people who looked at them with curious eyes in a failed attempt to see beyond the magical cloaks, no one paid special attention to them this way. 2 days had passed since the meeting in the throne room. During the past 48 hours, the war on the outside of the city slowly began to calm down a bit, and although the soul evolvers were still on guard, the number of enemies had decreased considerably and was now manageable enough for King Philip to allow the citizens to slowly return to their homes but still not allow them to approach the city walls. The energy shields had been activated to medium level as a precaution as occasionally a powerful mutant beast of great agility would appear which required the intervention of a second-order human soul evolver. The energy shields served to buy time if necessary and thus prevent the enemy from getting through the walls so easily. Xietain put on a thoughtful expression as he looked at the wooden door, but even after several seconds, he couldn't find anything strange there except the light layer of natural mana covering the wood of some chopped-down tree. There are several magic circles hidden in that door, you little scoundrel, Lilith said as she looked at the wooden door with her bright ruby eyes. She was standing right next to Xietain and Seraphina but only he was able to see and hear her, while the second princess of Gales was not even aware of her existence let alone her presence. Oh? Xietain made a small sound of surprise upon hearing Lilith's words. He couldn't see anything out of the ordinary in the door in front of him. Yeah, this rune encryptor is indeed good, at least quite a bit above if compared to your little sister Meng-Chi who just started. Orc, did you figure something out? Seraphina asked feeling surprised by the sound he had made. She thought he had been able to see past the camouflage veil her friend had placed on the wooden door to cover up the runes and magic circles. No, nothing like that. Xietain shook his head before changing the subject slightly. So, are we going in or what? Humph. Seraphina walked over to the door and pulled out a strange metallic pink key. She put it in the lock and soon a surge of mana spread out and covered the door in its entirety. Xietain blinked in surprise at the sound of the lock opening and finally became curious about the friend Seraphina said she wanted to introduce him to. Seraphina had gone to look for him early in his room, and when Xietain asked her what she needed, Seraphina said she wanted to introduce him to someone. After following her for several minutes, the two arrived at this point. Orc, you better not fall in love with my friend, Seraphina said with a snort in warning. For God's sake, move it, brat. Xietain rolled his eyes and urged her to open the door once and for all. Seraphina obediently opened and once the two of them were inside she quickly closed the door behind her as if she feared the people outside would see in. Xietain looked around and could not help but feel a little surprise in his heart. Because of Seraphina's status, Xietain had expected her friend to have certain luxuries but apparently, he made a mistake. This house was very normal, so normal that Xietain could even compare it to the old house where he grew up and where he lived with his loved ones for most of his years of life so far. There was no corridor, and when entering, the first thing one would find was a small living room with 2 green armchairs covered with some patches, a small glass table in the center probably intended for sharing tea during snack time, and a 2-door cabinet with glass windows from where one could see the interior filled with small plants. There were also 3 doors apart from the entrance and exit door. "Wait here," Serafina said. She took off her cloak and hung it on the wooden coat rack next to the entrance. Before Xietain could say anything, she disappeared beyond another wooden door. Without much to do, Xietain approached the wooden cabinet and casually ran a finger on it. There was not even a speck of dust there. What caught his attention the most, however, were the plants beyond the glass panes, as they all seemed to be quite exotic and had mysterious appearances. He glanced forward and sideways several times as if to make sure no one was there before reaching out his hand to the handle that would open the glass doors. However, his movement stopped when an emotionless voice sounded from behind him. "Don't do it, you'll get injured." Xietain almost jumped in fear when that voice sounded not too far from where he was. My God! He had just checked and there really was no one there, but he didn't even notice when this person had stepped into the room. Xietain turned around as he quickly said, "I'm sorry, I wasn't trying to." His words got stuck in his throat as his eyes fell on the young girl next to Serafina. The girl had the appearance of a young girl of 14 or 15, her small body was covered by a long light blue dress that appeared to be quite old and somewhat inappropriate for someone of her height. Her legs were covered but her slender arms were exposed. The girl's arms were so delicate that they made one worry about hurting her if one hugged her too long. Curiously, however, she did not give the impression of bad nutrition but of someone small by nature. This girl had the whitest skin Xietain had ever seen in his life. It even looked to be a sickly white because it was just so white. Her hair was snow white, as were her thin eyelashes and fine eyebrows. Her lips were a bit pale and as small as her whole body. Her entire expression seemed to cry out indifference and coldness towards life and the world in general. If Xietain had to describe the young girl next to Serafina, then he would probably use 2 words. Porcelain doll. Pretty and delicate looking, sweet, but incredibly fragile. Callie would have been better off letting this pervert open that cabinet so he could get exactly what he deserved for sticking his nose where it didn't belong. Serafina crossed her arms and began to tap her foot softly and repeatedly on the floor as she looked at Xietain with wide eyes. She looked like a jealous wife waiting for explanations from her husband for coming home late. The expression of the girl named Callie did not change at all when she heard Serafina's words. She said in a soft but casual voice, "I'm afraid my plants might have been damaged in the process. I'd rather avoid it if possible." So she warned him for the sake of the plants and not for his safety. Xietain didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he shook his head in his heart. He looked at Serafina and said in a serious voice, "Ponytails, do you want me to spank you a couple of times again? Have you forgotten what happened when you called me a pervert for no reason? If you're itchy, tell me, I'll immediately help you to soothe it." Xietain even raised his right hand and made a spanking gesture as if to emphasize his words a little more. "You?" Serafina looked at him and subconsciously brought both hands behind her body. The girl named Callie raised her small head towards Serafina and paused for a few seconds before turning her face back to Xietain. Quite surprising. This is the first time I've seen Serafina being defeated. Even though she said that, the tone of her voice didn't let the surprise she was talking about show. Every word that came out of her mouth was monotone. I wasn't defeated by anyone. Not by this orc at least." Serafina shouted with her eyes closed and her face slightly red. Xietain ignored the childish acts of the little princess of Gales and focused his attention on the young girl again. The reason he was looking at her so much was not due to her beauty, since no matter how one put it, she was still a little kid. This young girl was very special. Xietain could feel it somehow, but he could not put his finger on where that special characteristic was. Staring at a person for so long is not polite. Callie's voice brought him out of his inner thoughts. He blinked and calmly responded, "I'm sorry about that. That's the second time you've apologized in less than 60 seconds. I'm so ugh." Serafina's eyes went back and forth between Xietain and her friend. Her pupils glistened peculiarly as she said in a weird voice, "Callie, it's quite strange for you to talk so much with someone you just met. Is that so?" replied Callie in the same monotone voice as always, without any change in her expression. Xietain hesitated for a moment before carefully asking, Can you see me?" Callie turned her face that was previously looking at Serafina back to him. After a moment of silence, she returned in her usual tone of voice, "Close your eyes." Xietain did not understand but still did as she said and closed his eyes. Callie's voice entered his ears, "Can you see me?" "No." He answered. There's your answer, she said in a flat voice. Xietain opened his eyes and looked at the girl in front of him again. Right, Callie had kept her eyelids closed from the moment she entered the room. In fact, Callie didn't seem to be able to move her legs either, as she was sitting on a small magic wheelchair that floated a few inches off the ground and with several dozen golden magic runes around it. Ahem. Xietain scratched his head in embarrassment and slowly looked away as he was caught by Seraphina again. I'm just curious, that's all, he said. Xietain let out a light sigh and said in an honest voice, it looked as if Callie was looking at me, that's why I asked that question just now. I apologize if I offended you. Seraphina looked at Callie and said in a careful voice, Callie, this orc can be a bit of a brute sometimes, but he really is a good person, I guarantee it. I know, or else you wouldn't have brought him here, Callie replied in a flat voice. She kept her face fixed on Xietain and said calmly, although I cannot see your appearance or Seraphina's or that of any other being living or dead, I have a skill that allows me to see something that neither you nor anyone else in the world can see. That's why I know where you are or what you are doing, even though I can't see the kind of expression you are putting on. Xietan's eyes lit up. I see. So that's why you knew earlier that I was about to open that cabinet door. Callie didn't say anything for several seconds, she just kept staring at Xietain, and even though her expression never changed from the beginning to the end, he couldn't help but feel that her stare was really intense. Callie, is something wrong? Seraphina asked as she noticed that something wasn't right with her friend. Callie opened her pale and somewhat dried lips, and in the same monotone voice as always, she said something that surprised not only Seraphina and Xietain, but Lilith as well. You have something inside you, in your soul. Chapter 843 Soul Manipulation, Part 1. You have something inside you, in your soul. The words Callie said were so confusing that Xietain frowned and inadvertently looked at Lilith as if to ask if she knew anything about it. Scoundrel, don't look. Lilith tried to warn him, but it was too late. Xietain jumped in surprise just as Callie's voice sounded inside the room again. I knew it. As he turned to look at her, Xietain felt a chill run down his spine when he noticed that Callie was no longer looking in his direction nor in Seraphina's direction but was currently staring at the place where Lilith was currently. This little kid. Did she notice Lilith? Xietain broke into sweating bullets at such a thought. Lilith let out a big exasperated sigh. She scratched her head and said, not knowing whether to laugh or cry, why is it that all the people around you are or end up becoming anomalies, little brother Xietain? If before Xietain had any doubts, then now he no longer had any after hearing Lilith's words. This girl named Callie seems to have a skill to see the presence of a soul or even the soul itself. My skills sense distortion and invisibility are of no use here. She already knows that I am standing next to you, Lilith said as she looked at Callie, curious to know what the young girl would do now. Xietan's brain showed its ability to work overtime under pressure, and in an instant he reached an important decision about what he was going to do next. Nothing. He wasn't going to do anything. He did not plan to kill the girl to keep Lilith's presence under wraps or make meaningless threats. He would simply do nothing. At the end of the day, there were plenty of excuses he could make, and since the only person present was Seraphina, there wasn't much to worry about. Callie? What do you mean by those words? Seraphina looked at her friend curiously and completely oblivious to what was happening. Callie turned her face towards Xietain and after a few moments sighed weakly. It's nothing, forget it. Oh? Lilith raised an eyebrow and a flash of surprise shone in her ruby eyes. Xietain was confused as well. He looked at Callie and could barely restrain himself from asking her why she was hiding the presence of a fourth person inside the room from Seraphina, who was her friend. Seraphina, what is your friend's name? You haven't properly introduced us yet, Callie said softly. She calmly pointed out, I don't think his name is really Orc, is it? And no. His name is Xietain. Seraphina replied somewhat awkwardly. Xietain? A peculiar name, better than Orc though. Callie nodded slightly. May I ask the reason you call him Orc? I assume he calls you ponytails because of your hairstyle. I've helped you with that before after all. Why, you're quite talkative today, aren't you, Callie? Growled Seraphina under her breath. She cleared her throat and said, trying to keep calm, let's forget the Orc thing for now, okay? No, I am also curious to know the reason why you call me like that. Xietain folded his arms and looked at Seraphina steadily as he said in a clear voice, I've been curious for a while now regarding the way you address me. Seraphina looked at him hesitantly for several seconds before shaking her head fiercely as if to send some memory flying. I won't tell. Believe me, if I tell you, you'll regret it later. Lilith had been holding back her laughter since the conversation had started, but seeing how Seraphina was behaving, she finally couldn't help but burst out laughing. Ha 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 ha. Daddy Xietain, if I were you I'd listen to the little princess and wouldn't ask anymore he. Sometimes, ignorance is bliss. Xietain frowned slightly and an expression that was filled with confusion and doubt covered his face. Now that he thought better of it, Lilith had been at his side when he was unconscious, so she should have seen and heard everything going on around him. Could it be that something had happened with the orcs while he was out of combat? Xietain suddenly didn't feel so much like knowing the past when he thought about this. Perhaps realizing that he no longer had any intention of pursuing the matter, Callie simply shrugged indifferently. Forget it then, she said in an emotionless voice. Her face looked at Xietain and her eyelids trembled slightly as she calmly said, what I said before regarding you having something in your soul, that wasn't a trick feint to lure you. You really do have something inside you. What? Did you really mean it? Xietain frowned and his voice suddenly became serious. Callie, can you tell me what you see? Please, I'll pay you whatever you want. Xietain had thought that Callie had said those words earlier just to surprise him and try to force a reaction from him so that she would be able to confirm the existence of a fourth person in the room. However, it seemed that Callie had not said that just for the sake of saying it. Even Lilith's expression had become grave at this point. The matters involving the soul could not be treated lightly in any way. The soul was what strengthened the body and the container of the records that made up every living existence in the universe. If an existence had the ability to crush souls, then a level 1 soul evolver would be able to slaughter any enemy with a single thought regardless of the difference in levels. That was how important the matter at hand was. Precisely because of this, Xietain felt anxious and said that he was willing to pay Callie. Although he did not trust her, it was an irrefutable fact that she had discovered Lilith, and this could only mean that Callie really could see the souls of living beings. Besides, Xietain believed that at least for the sake of Seraphina, her friend, Callie would not try to harm him. Callie did not mention anything about receiving payment. She seemed to take Xietan's words as nothing but air since after a couple of seconds she revealed what she could see. From birth until now, my eyes have always been closed, and no matter how hard I try, I simply cannot open them in the same way that I cannot move the lower part of my body. However, even though I can't see with my eyes, I can still sense souls. Callie did not mention life nor did she say anything regarding the gods blessing her with a special skill. However, Xietain agreed with her not to do so. Freewebble.cm. Why should she, who was deprived of her eyes and legs, feel grateful to the gods or to life? It was good enough that Callie was not blaming anyone and was going on with her life in a mature way despite her age. She continued, regardless if there are thousands or if there are millions, each living being has only one soul. Moreover, after many years I discovered that no matter how many living beings walked before me and regardless of their race or gender, they all possessed a soul of red, orange, yellow, green, cyan, indigo, or violet color. 7 colors, the 7 colors of the electromagnetic spectrum. The electromagnetic spectrum was basically an energy carrier. An energy carrier could emit, release, or absorb, devour, another carrier, becoming stronger while reaffirming its own identity as an energy carrier. Xietain and Lilith gasped as they realized something shockingly important, something that even Callie herself was unaware of because of the small place she was born and raised in, something that only someone like Xietain who was a peer of a higher existence could appreciate. An energy carrier was like the fingerprint, the identification of a living being. Weren't souls, record containers, the identification of every living being? Was the soul record a being or thing capable of controlling the energy that the electromagnetic spectrum or energy carriers released? Was it not by absorbing the energy released by the defeated that others could become stronger? Callie continued, living beings with weak souls have red-colored souls and they are the vast majority. Those a little stronger than normal have orange-colored souls. Then there are those who have yellow-colored souls. I have only seen a handful of people with this type of soul. Yellow souls are followed by green souls, and so far I have only met one person with this type of soul. Seraphina's father, King Philip D. Gales. Taking advantage of the momentary silence, Seraphina couldn't help but ask curiously, Callie, what about my soul? You never told me this before. Seraphina, you really should be more patient. You are a princess, do you forget? Callie shook her head slightly and although her voice had not changed for some reason she sounded quite helpless. Why on earth would I mention this to you before? I'm just saying all this because I discovered something new today and I'm curious about your friend, that's all. Without giving Seraphina a chance to say anything else, Callie focused again on Xietain and continued, green-colored souls are followed by cyan-colored ones. In all my life I have only seen one person with this kind of soul. Her Majesty Queen Helena, Seraphina's mother. It is really unfortunate that the Queen lost her life, her talent would definitely have let her surpass His Majesty Philip. Seraphina bit her lips and a flash of sadness shone in her eyes. However, that sadness soon turned to conviction and pride as she learned how powerful and talented her mother really was, even more than her father the king. Just as Xietain was nodding silently since he had heard from Lilith that Queen Helena's talent was indeed high, a cry of surprise made him jump slightly. The color of treasures! Lilith exclaimed in shock. Xietain didn't even bother with dissimulation, he looked at her in surprise for her sudden outburst. She ignored him and muttered with trembling eyes, red normal, orange rare, yellow magic, green epic, cyan legend, indigo demigod, violet god. Callie could not hear Lilith's voice, but as she saw Xietain looking at the fourth mysterious person with his soul fluctuating, she judged several things correctly. Callie did not lose her composure and calmly continued, beyond cyan is unknown to me, even Seraphina has a cyan-colored soul. Eh? I will surpass my father. Seraphina exclaimed in ecstasy at the news that she shared her beloved mother's talent. If you work hard, Callie pointed out. She ignored Seraphina and continued, even though I don't know beyond cyan, I am 99% sure that the colors that follow are indigo and violet. Only then can the electromagnetic spectrum be completed. This time even Xietain got as shocked as Lilith, except that unlike her, all he could do was stand there, frozen. Seraphina, Callie, and probably no living being in Eventide world knew that beyond the epic or legend grade, there were other even more powerful treasures. However, even if they did know, they probably wouldn't attach importance to the colors of the orbs because only Callie would be able to associate the treasures with the souls and their colors. However, you are different, Xietain, Callie said suddenly. More specifically, your soul is different and that is why your existence is. What do you mean? He quickly pursued in a voice eager to know more. This was a critical point for him. No, it probably was for the entire universe. Even the proud and powerful Lilith had her eyes pinned on the disabled girl in the wheelchair for fear of losing sight of her. Your soul is neither red, orange, yellow, green, cyan, indigo, or violet. Your soul is white, pure white. Chapter 844 Soul Manipulation, Part 2 of 2. Xietain lowered his head and rubbed his chin as he listened to the words Callie said. When she told him that his soul was white, pure white, Xietain suddenly felt a trace of momentary inspiration. He did not dare to let that opportunity pass him by, so he quickly began to chase that little trace that was just within the reach of the extension of his arm. Seeing Xietain suddenly fall into deep contemplation, Seraphina and Callie instinctively felt that it was best not to disturb, and so neither of them said anything. Even Lilith looked at him with bright eyes. Her heart felt uneasy and anxious. She knew that this could be a very important moment not only for Xietain but also for her future together with him. This could be the crucial moment that would perhaps mark a new beginning in the history of the cosmos. The minutes passed without Xietain noticing the flow of time at all. For him, the only important thing was to pursue that small trace of light that seemed to be guiding him to the only existing exit from the prison in which they were all locked into. Xietain had never in his life felt so happy to have been a good student and a great reader in the past. His knowledge of physics, biology, anatomy, and many other fields were mixed with the hundreds and even thousands of theories he had read in different light novels. If Lilith knew what he was doing, she could undoubtedly slap him to death for daring to mess around like that. The body was the equivalent of the vase or container, the soul was the water or nutrient that fed the rose that grew represented life. Without a vase, the water could not be contained in one place and consequently, the rose would soon die from lack of water. The body was the light bulb that illuminated and the electricity was the soul that gave energy. The light was the product or result of the union between the bulb and the electricity. If the bulb was too big and the electricity too weak, then there would be no light unless the electricity became strong enough to activate the circuit switch at the same time. If the electric current was too powerful and exceeded the limit of the bulb, then the bulb would explode into pieces. How did life form? Based on the electromagnetic spectrum, each soul seemed to have a limit, electric current, and each physical body usually had the same potential of the soul, light bulb, or else problems would occur for life, light, to exist without inconvenience. The electromagnetic spectrum was composed of 7 colors that coincidentally or not matched the color of the souls of all living beings. However, what about Xietan's soul then? His soul was white after all. Xietain recalled that during his physics classes he was once educated that the union of red, green, and blue could produce the 7 colors of the electromagnetic spectrum. This was called RGB because of the initials of each of the 3 colors. However, the really amazing thing happened when the 7 colors were joined together. If the 7 colors of the electromagnetic spectrum were united, the result was a pure white color free of impurities. At the same time, the white color was the container of the 7 colors of the spectrum. For example, if after a storm the sun emerged, what normally occurred was the birth of a rainbow, which was composed of the 7 colors of the electromagnetic spectrum. The light of the sun was white light, and when it passed through a drop of crystalline water that light was decomposed and its true internal composition was revealed, the 7 colors. From one point of view, Xietan's soul was the combination of the 7 types of souls that existed. However, from another point of view, Xietan's soul was the container of those 7 types of souls, the electromagnetic spectrum itself. Now, the question was the next one. How could he, who was the source of energy and container, create or nurture and destroy other souls? Xietain found the partial answer to nurture, but he still needed to improve much more. As for creating or destroying, he simply could not see beyond the wall in front of him. He had already reached the end of the corridor and had caught that bright light trace that was guiding him. Now it was up to him if he could break through the wall blocking his path to see what lay beyond. I see. Xietain muttered under his breath. He raised his head and looked at Callie gratefully as he slowly said, the white light makes up the 7 colors of the electromagnetic spectrum. If you disassemble it you get those 7 colors. It will be up to you to manipulate and control the wavelength and wavelength frequency. Immediately after those words left his mouth, a series of messages began to flash continuously in his retinas one after another, just like a small child jumping happily in front of its parents after being picked up from school after so much expectation and waiting. Congratulations! You are the first existence in the multiverse to catch a spark of the essence of the soul record. This is an unexpected but very welcome achievement. You receive the special reward, Wishing Soul Orb. You have learned the active skill, Soul Manipulation EX rank level 1. Apart from those 4th messages, Xietain received a 5th message. However, when he read only the first line, he immediately stopped and decided to continue later. He wanted to savor the happy moment first, as it seemed that the 5th message was not particularly a reward for his wonderful achievement. Lilith looked at Xietain in shock. She didn't know what had happened, but in comparison to the 2 girls in the room, Lilith could feel that he had become stronger. However, before Lilith or either of the other 2 girls could ask or say anything, a flash of 7-colored light suddenly covered the room. Both the surrounding records and the surrounding mana swirled into one point and were quickly absorbed. Seraphina subconsciously closed her eyes and Callie did not manage to see anything as she simply could not open her eyelids. The only one who managed to see what that object was Lilith, since Xietain reached his hand up and kept it in his storage ring as soon as his fingers came in contact with it. Xietain, you. Lilith looked at him with wide eyes, not knowing from where to start. She knew deep in her heart what had just happened. It was just that Lilith's common sense wouldn't let her accept it in the same way that a past Earth human wouldn't be able to easily accept seeing another human ascending to godhood, because while Xietain hadn't become a divine being, his achievement and what he had just obtained were undoubtedly more amazing given the circumstances. After 2 or 3 seconds, Seraphina slightly opened one of her eyes first, and upon seeing that everything had returned to normal she opened the other with a snap. What was that? She asked in amazement. Callie kept her face fixed on Xietain and said in a flat voice, I'm curious too, looks like you got a good thing. Xietain looked at Callie for several seconds, the expression on his face was unreadable. Finally, after calming his agitated heart a little, he asked in a clear and firm voice, Callie, is there anything you want? Anything, tell me and I will do whatever is within my power to get it for you. If I can't give it to you now, then I will give it to you when I become powerful enough to get it. The small room fell silent for several seconds before Seraphina looked at Xietain in surprise and began to ask question after question. Orc? What are you talking about? Besides, what was that flash from before? You know something, don't you? Hey! Unfortunately for the youngest princess of the Gales Kingdom, Xietain was in no mood to entertain her at the moment, therefore, his focus was entirely on the little doll in the wheelchair. Callie didn't immediately respond to Xietan's words, she simply looked at him for a few seconds before lowering her head and muttering under her breath. I see. Looks like my explanation about souls helped you a little. A little? Xietain forced a smile and shook his head. He pointed out, Callie, your skill and your explanation from before might be the gunpowder that was missing for the bullet that could change history to finally be fired. If the bullet succeeds in reaching its destination, then your name and existence will deserve to be eternally recorded in the books that will be chronicled. Seraphina was becoming more and more dumbfounded as she stood there, feeling like a fool left out. Ever since Xietain and Callie met, the two had been talking about things Seraphina couldn't understand or acting mysteriously. They hadn't even gotten started talking about runes and equipment like it was supposed to be. Callie said nothing for a full minute and simply sat still in her wheelchair. Because her expression was as unperturbed as ever, figuring out or trying to decipher what she was thinking was basically impossible. Despite her age, Callie was definitely very intelligent and mature. Not only was she very quiet and calm compared to most girls her age, even surpassing Seraphina who was 1 or 2 years older than her, but Callie was also very cognitive and analytical, otherwise she would never have associated the color of the souls with the electromagnetic spectrum and thus completing the colors she was missing. It was not difficult for Callie to understand that if she was the gunpowder then Zemin was the bullet he was talking about. However, she did not understand how far the depth of his ambition reached or how great his final goal was. Even so, there was one thing Callie did understand, and that was that thanks to her the man her friend brought today had acquired something truly great. If Zemin had not brought up the proposition then Callie would never have asked for something in return for something she was going to do anyway. However, now that the opportunity was in front of her things were different. Life has not been kind to me, but I am not complaining as I have learned a valuable lesson. Callie raised her head to look at Zemin's soul and said in a flat voice, things like pride are of no use, and stubbornness can take us far or bring us down soon. You seem to be someone proud enough to not want to owe me anything even though I never asked you for anything in return for what I did or said. Additionally, something tells me that if I refuse to request something from you you will continue persisting until I give up, which makes you stubborn. Strangely, it seems to be that your stubbornness will not bring you down soon but will take you far. Zemin had a somewhat bittersweet smile on his face as he listened to the 14 or 15-year-old girl in front of him reading him like an open book. Callie could already understand him that well without even seeing him. How good would she be if she could open her eyes? No. Maybe she was able to do it this way precisely because she couldn't see what everyone else saw, and in return, she was able to see other things that most couldn't or ignored. I'm not like you, I can't be bullet because my legs won't take me anywhere. Maybe my destiny is to be gunpowder, to propel the bullet further. Since I can't be bullet and can only be gunpowder, then I can't be stubborn or proud. That's why I will accept your proposal and request something in return for what I inadvertently gave you. Zemin didn't know why, but for some reason, he felt his heart heavy now that he had heard the words of the young girl in front of him. It was strange, a kind of sadness different from the one he had felt when he had met Luo Ning or Xiang Feng. Whatever you want, ask for it. Zemin nodded firmly despite the fact that the young girl in front of him was not able to see it. His voice was extremely serious as he reaffirmed his previous words, whatever you want, no matter how crazy you think it sounds, just ask for it and I'll give it to you. Callie kept her eyes closed but he felt as if she was looking at him. She looked at him intently for almost a full minute before finally making her request. Chapter 845 Powder and Bullet. There were many things Callie could request and Zemin was really going to give his all to grant it. At the end of the day, just as she had said, he was a stubborn and proud person. Not only did Zemin not like to feel in debt to other people but he also did not like to feel that he had somehow abused the knowledge or power of others. Just as with Lilith in the beginning, he was going to help her so that he could be on equal footing, although that had now changed and he was going to help her because she was the woman he loved. As for Callie, the girl was a complete enigma to Zemin. When she opened her small mouth and her pale lips moved, her monotone voice, but that seemed to contain a tinge of pleading, or maybe that was Zemin's imagination, rang out as she made her request. I don't want anything material as perhaps you was thinking, neither do I need you to at least try to find a cure or solution for the situation with my body. I just hope you can take me with you on your travels. For a few seconds, the entire room was silent. The runes on the door of the house and probably the ones hidden in the walls were definitely doing a good job in not allowing the noise from the street to reach the interior. Seraphina's eyes slowly opened wider and wider as she looked at her friend with utter surprise. Although she had not known Callie for a long time, Seraphina knew enough of her personality to understand the type of person Callie was. However, in less than an hour, there had been so much out of the ordinary that the shock in her heart had finally taken away her words. Indeed, just as Callie said, what Zemin had expected was for her to ask for a cure for her legs and eyes. Therefore, her sudden and unexpected request shook the ground he was standing on, making it difficult for Zemin to respond to her immediately. Seraphina quickly stood in front of Callie and put both hands on her tiny shoulders as she said in a serious voice, Callie, why don't you better ask for something else? He is really strong, you know? He could give you whatever you want. Seraphina knew that Zemin was not someone from this world and that he would eventually leave. It was even highly probable that their paths would never cross again. Therefore, she was trying to help him out of a situation that was probably very uncomfortable for him. After all, Zemin had told Callie that he would fulfill her request. But Seraphina knew that it was impossible for him to take someone from this world into his. I do know he is strong. Even I who rarely leave my house have heard Zemin's name at least a dozen times. Callie said calmly. She extended her delicate little hand and slowly asked Seraphina to move a step out of the way so she could be in front of him once more. However, there is nothing I want. If I want luxuries I can have them myself, I don't need anyone to give them to me. That's true, but... Seraphina knew that if Callie exposed her talent for reading and encrypting runes, drawing powerful magic circles, then she would be able to have everything she want. All the royal families of the world would do their best to please her for the sake of winning her favor. That remarkable was her talent. However, Callie never sought luxury at all, and that was precisely why she lived in such a simple house. The youngest princess in the kingdom looked at Xietain with a defeated expression on her face, as if telling him that she had done her part to help him but that she had nothing more to say. To Seraphina's surprise, however, Xietan's expression was not one of helplessness as she expected but was serious and contemplative as he looked at Callie in silence. A thought suddenly crossed Seraphina's mind and she immediately felt her heart begin to race at such a possibility. After several seconds, Xietain continued to stare at Callie and said in a serious voice, "Are you sure about that? Before you answer let me tell you that I am not someone from this world. I came here after activating a skill to take a destructive attack away from my allies. But after completing my promise to His Majesty Philip I plan to return to my homeland where many are waiting for me in order to continue from where we stagnate." For the first time since Xietain met Callie, he saw her wooden expression break slightly, and although it only lasted an instant, Xietain finally cleared any doubts as to whether he was talking to a living human being or not. Her snow-white eyebrows fluttered slightly and her eyelashes trembled as if she was trying to open her eyes when she heard Xietan's revelation. "That's unexpected," she said, her voice completely devoid of emotion that betrayed her surprise. "Unexpected but not unwelcome." Xietain blinked in surprise. Callie wasn't getting the reaction he was expecting at all. Except for her initial surprise that lasted a flicker of time, she didn't even seem incredulous at what he had revealed to her. "That's okay too," Callie muttered to herself. She lifted her head so that her eyes aligned as much as possible with his and said in a clear voice, "In that case, take me with you when you return to your world. I guess that will be the real start of my journey as Gunpowder, Bullet." Xietain forced a smile and scratched his head as he said under his breath, "I seem to be getting nicknames pretty fast lately." Xietain had noticed Seraphina's eyes locked on him and could practically feel her heart racing from afar. However, he focused on Callie for now and noted calmly, "Callie, I have no problem with taking you to my world and keeping you by my side. In fact, that would be a lot better for me as you will surely be of great help to my growth thanks to your wonderful skill of seeing souls. However, what about you? Are you really okay with leaving behind your friends, your family, your home, abandoning everything for an unknown future millions of times more dangerous than the one you are living in now?" Callie didn't even have to pause to consider her answers in the face of Xietan's series of questions. Her sweet but at the same time indifferent voice was as unwavering as ever as she expressed her thoughts and feelings. "My only friend is Seraphina. As for family, I don't know if I have one or if I was born from a rock. I only have memories from this point about 3 or 4 months back. Beyond that everything is blank to me." "What?" Xietain looked at her in shock before looking at Seraphina. "Is that right?" Seraphina hesitated for a moment before nodding. A few months ago the guards of the North Wall found Callie passed out on the outskirts of the city. No one knows to this day how or why she appeared there. It was not long after and while I was taking care of her that Callie asked me if she could borrow my battle equipment. She improved every piece of my equipment to the point where it looked completely different from the previous one. We have been friends all this time." Xietain looked at the young girl in the wheelchair with a startled expression on her face. Callie was indeed riddled with mysteries, from her skill of seeing souls to her intelligence clearly way above normal and from her strange physical disability to her unknown past. Her whole being seemed to be shrouded by a veil that covered her reality. "That's why you have nothing to worry about," she said in the same tone of voice as before. "I have no great ties holding me here, so I won't feel any sadness when you take me to your world. Of course, if you refuse my request then that's fine with me too, I'll understand. A bullet only needs the gunpowder to work just one time to go off after all." After seeing the records of the equipment that the soul evolvers of Bearcrest City used, Callie realized that her ability to understand and draw runes was undoubtedly a priceless treasure. Even the equipment that such an important figure as Seraphina, one of the 2 princesses of the entire kingdom, had runes that to Callie were nothing more than waste. However, except for her ability to draw runes, there was nothing else Callie had to offer. Besides, it would only be a one-sided business deal. She knew that other people would only approach her to make her draw runes. For the first time, however, Callie met a person who valued her higher than anyone else, not for the fact that she could bestow great power with just a pair of magic circles but for a capacity that even If she revealed it to the whole world would be considered useless except to blind people. Since Xietain called himself Bullet and at her gunpowder, Callie felt that maybe she could make a good team with him. After all, she was the only living being who could see souls and he was the only existence with a soul that contained all types of souls. However, she might have been overestimating herself. Xietain had already learned about the electromagnetic spectrum and souls while with his strength he would not need her ability to draw runes. Why on earth would someone so strong want to drag around a 15-year-old girl who couldn't even move under her own power? It would just be a tedious drawback. Very well, since you're so sure then so be it. Callie lifted her small head abruptly as Xietan's voice snapped her out of her pessimistic inner thoughts. For the first time since she could remember, her voice wavered for a split second. What did you just say? Why are you so surprised? Xietain looked at her dumbfounded and remarked, didn't I tell you, to me, you are someone that the closer I can keep from me the better. I am sure that with your intelligence and ability to analyze souls I will be able to grow much faster. Before she could say anything, Xietain extended his right hand forward and said with a faint smile, welcome to the Transcendent faction, Callie. Subconsciously, Callie reached out her small hand and took his hand which was practically twice the size. She still seemed unable to believe that he had actually agreed to take her with him. Callie's hand felt very soft and fragile, therefore, Xietain subconsciously treated it with special care. With you being my gunpowder I am sure that soon the whole universe will hear our names. You'll see how fun but dangerous life is behind these walls. Well, as long as I'm alive you won't have to worry about your safety anyway, and it's not like anyone or anything could kill me just for wanting to kill me, he said. I'm sure we'll be a great team, Powder. Xietain chuckled. Just as Xietain spoke those words while still holding Callie's small hand, a green-lettered message flashed across his retina. In just one day, he had already received so many surprises, and it wasn't even 12 noon. Chapter 846 Third Mysterious Object in the Soul. Your bases in China, Chongping District, have been firmly established and your rule has spread among more than 90% of the humans in the aforementioned area. Despite your absence, as the leader of the unofficial faction under the name Transcendent you received the corresponding title. You have received the title Leader of Chongping. Your bases in China, Xietain District, have been firmly established and your rule has spread among more than 90% of the humans in the aforementioned area. Despite your absence, as the leader of the unofficial faction under the name Transcendent you received the corresponding title. You have received the title Xietain Leader. Congratulations! The number of intelligent beings under your rule has broken the barrier of the million. Xietan's eyes sparkled with joy and even to Callie who was still holding his hand, it became too obvious that a great wave of relief washed over him. Did something good happen? Seraphina's eyes sparkled as she saw the slight innocent smile on Xietan's ever-serious face. In contrast to his sly or fake smiles, his current smile was so different that it was very easy to identify its genuineness. Xietain looked at her while still smiling and nodded, that's right. My subordinates and friends seem to be doing quite well without me back in my world. 2 of the territories we controlled before were finally accepted by the soul record as mine. I just received notification of that. I see. Seraphina looked at him with complicated eyes and sighed, your friends must be really powerful, aren't they? Being able to capture territories in the middle of a world as peculiar and weird as yours must definitely be incredibly difficult, especially considering that you and they have been evolving for so little time. When my father became king it was all very smooth and simple, the soul record identified the transfer of authority and voila, no fighting and no wars. Well, Gales has been an established kingdom for many years after all. Xietain nodded. But, my subordinates are strong. Especially my second in command. She is strong enough that even I respect her from my heart. She? Seraphina immediately grew anxious and asked hurriedly, your second in command is a woman? Xietain blinked and replied without much thought, well, that's why she's a she. Seraphina fell under contemplation for a moment before nodding. She muttered to herself, if you trust her enough then this girl has to be really quite special. Although Xietain heard Seraphina's words he said nothing as she was clearly in her own world now. He shook his head and turned his focus back to Callie only to realize that all this time he hadn't let go of her hand. I'm sorry. Xietain nodded and let go of her gently as if worried she would break if he made an abrupt move. Xietain, what stage is your world in? Callie asked suddenly. Second stage. Callie frowned slightly, her second change of expression in all this time even though the number of surprising things that had happened would have made anyone jump at least a dozen times. Second stage. Can you tell me how long you've been evolving? Also, how old are you really? Callie asked another question again and pointed out, Seraphina just said that you and your whole world have been evolving for a short time. Is it 10 years? Is it 20 years? 10 years or 20 years? Xietain forced a smile and shook his head as he listened to the young girl's great misestimation in front of him. Callie, I will turn 21 in 3 months and my world has been evolving for approximately 7 months to the present day. Callie's small mouth opened slightly for a moment before she closed it again. I see. Callie murmured as she nodded slightly. She kept her expression fixed on him as she pointed out in a flat voice, in just 7 months you've made it this far. Are you aware that the stage you are at, not in terms of level but in terms of strength, is a stage that only the vast minority can reach after centuries of effort? But you did it in such a short time. Xietain shrugged, actually, everyone in my world grows up fast. Bing Shui is currently that's the name of my second in command, by the way. As I was telling you, she was at level 90 when I came to this world but her battle power was comparable to that of a king of kingdom. I'm sure at this point she should be even mightier. Callie remained silent as she stared at him. Xietain felt as if she was looking beyond him, and indeed, he was not wrong. I wonder if your fast growth, as well as that of your world and its inhabitants, is related to that something inside your soul or if it's because your world is just special in some way, she said as she focused on Xietan's chest area. Xietan's expression turned serious as he listened to the words Callie said. So much had happened in such a short time that he had forgotten the reason why Callie had initiated the talk about souls and their representative colors. Callie, can you tell me what you see in me? He asked in a serious voice. She said nothing for the first 5 seconds before calmly stating, your soul is pure white, I have no doubt about that. However, right there, around your chest area, you have 3 strange objects that are clearly not part of your soul. Although 2 of them seem to be attached to you, especially one of them, the hotter of the 2. 3 objects? Xietain felt the world around him spinning and was about to fall to the floor when he quickly calmed down. Those 2 objects must be annihilation of the falling sky and the endless blue lotus flame. Xietain patted his chest in relief as he whispered those words. He was already scared enough with a foreign object in his soul, if 2 more suddenly appeared then Xietain might faint from fear. Annihilation of the falling sky and endless blue lotus flame? Seraphina looked at him in confusion and asked, what are those? Xietain subconsciously looked at Callie as that information was too important. However, he soon scoffed at himself. While it was impossible for him to trust Callie 100% since he was just getting to know her, she had no real way to hurt him and even if she did, there was nothing for her to gain by doing that. Besides, Xietain doubted that the little porcelain doll in the wheelchair had malicious intentions towards him. Annihilation of the falling sky is a special type of armament, it's called soul armament and it attaches itself to the user's soul. To be honest, I don't know very well how soul armaments works since the way annihilation of the falling sky ended up in my hands is too complicated and special. Xietain calmly revealed. After a slight pause, he continued, as for the endless blue lotus flame, it is an extremely powerful flame with some intelligence. We formed a special contract between us and now we are something like master and servant. Seraphina looked at Xietain without blinking for what seemed an eternity before sighing exaggeratedly, you know, orc. Somehow I'm beginning to feel a little sorry for your subordinates and friends in your world. Xietain looked at her dumbfounded, what's that about? Don't give me that. Seraphina immediately began to tremble and pointed out loudly, weren't you using all your strength before? No wonder if one of your men dies of cardiac failure one of these days. What kind of monster was this? Seraphina was simply speechless. The more she got to know Xietain the more she felt that her whole life until the day of that fateful meet had been a farce. Xietain shook his head and didn't bother with the immature girl. Callie was definitely much more mature than Seraphina, by far. In fact, Callie's behavior and maturity made Xietain forget for seconds that she was just a girl of 15 years old at most. As if she was already used to Seraphina's sometimes childish behavior, Callie continued to focus on Xietan's soul as she slowly said, so, 2 of the 3 objects in your soul are part of your strength, I understand. But, Xietain, are you sure there shouldn't be a 3rd one? The 3rd object is, a little hard to describe. There definitely shouldn't be a 3rd object in my soul. Xietain replied in a serious voice. Callie, what do you see? This object is. It's some kind of incomplete rock. It could also be something plastic, or is it a piece of metal? Callie muttered a little unsure of her own words. Xietain frowned slightly but did not interrupt her. It seemed that even with Callie's ability it was difficult to understand the existence of the 3rd object in his soul, but such a thing was hard for Xietain to accept. Annihilation of the falling sky was a powerful soul armament that had completely devoured the life of a 4th-order soul evolver with a single strike and the endless blue lotus flame was one of the few divine flames that existed in the story of the universe. Even if the 2 were not at full power now, The fact that they were practically unmatched treasures was irrefutable given that both annihilation of the falling sky and the endless blue lotus flame could continue growing and perhaps return to their peak states if Xietain moved his pieces right. Something even stronger than a weapon capable of crushing the life out of a fourth-order existence and a flame equivalent to a god-grade treasure? Xietain couldn't think of anything crazier than that, and craziest of all was that this object was inside him, in his soul. This piece of rock, or whatever it really is, constantly releases a strange light. No, it's not light, but it's lightning. Lightning? It's lightning. Callie nodded, this time sounding completely sure. Those lightning flashes are small and thin, all of them are black with deep red edges and... I'm not quite sure about this but... It seems to me that those lightning flashes are just passively there now. That piece of rock seems to be sleeping and releasing no more power than necessary. Releasing no more power than necessary? Xietain opened his eyes wide and hurriedly asked, releasing no more power than necessary for what? Unfortunately for him, Callie shook her head. I'm afraid I can't reply to that question because I don't know the answer. Oh. Xietain couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. However, he quickly patted Callie's head and tried to sound normal as he said, well, don't worry too much, Callie. You've helped me a lot and, realizing what he was doing, Xietain cleared his throat and slowly withdrew his hand. Sorry about that, it's just a habit of mine I have. Used to Luoning, Xiang Feng, the Wen twins, and Bai Shilin, Xietain had subconsciously treated Callie like a little kid he had known for a long time. Thinking of Bai Shilin, Xietain sighed in his heart and a glint of sadness shone in his eyes. Even though the two of them were not together for long, he really loved the little baby like his daughter and now he could not even be by her side. Callie's expression was unperturbed and Xietan's subconscious affectionate movement did not seem to shake her at all. She said in her melodious but at the same time monotone voice, Xietain, since that third object has been in your soul all this time then don't worry too much, it's probably not a bad thing. That object might even have been there since your birth, no one can say for sure. Xietain hesitated for a few seconds before nodding and sighing, I guess we can just leave it at that for now. Callie, I will help you become stronger. Now that you are part of my faction and an important person to me I will do everything I can to make you stronger. That way maybe one day you will be able to help me identify what that strange object is. If Callie became more powerful, Xietain could be more at ease as he would probably not be able to stay by her side forever and Callie's existence was too important to him to let anything bad happen to her. Besides, if she grew stronger and so did her skills, maybe someday she would learn more about souls and that would benefit Xietain greatly. Callie and Xia were probably the keys he needed to eventually become the most powerful being under the stars. He had long since accepted his identity as an anomaly of the universe. The constellation of the heavenly wolf Sirius had even tried to communicate with him during his childhood, long before the arrival of the soul record on Earth. Since before the soul record's arrival on Earth something this abnormal had already happened in his life, Xietain could not rule out that perhaps that third object had always been in his soul except that he did not know it. Callie was silent and hesitated whether she should say her next words or not. She looked at the spot next to Xietain, right where Lilith stood, but a second later she turned her head and looked at Seraphina before finally shaking her head. What she was going to say would expose the existence of that mysterious person, and since Xietain was keeping it a secret apparently not only from Seraphina but from everyone, she wasn't going to expose his cover. After all, she was his powder now. Especially after hearing for the first time in her life that she was considered important by another living being. Chapter 847 Weapon Upgrade. Since it was impossible for Callie to continue talking about the third object in Xietan's soul not only because of her lack of knowledge about it but also because she did not wish to reveal one of his secrets, what she did was to move on to the initial topic for which Seraphina had brought him to her house and that if it were not for his soul would have been the main topic as well as probably the only one they would have talked about if there was any conversation at all. Xietain, do you want me to draw runes for you? Callie held out her delicate hand and with a gesture asked him to come closer. He obeyed like a good boy and stared in confusion as the little girl's small hand traced the lines of his armor. The person who drew these runes is definitely very talented. She murmured in a flat voice. If he or she has really only been evolving for about 7 months then his or her achievement in rune encryption will be monstrous in the future. However, the blacksmith is also something else. The world you come from is really full of surprises, isn't it? Looks like it won't be boring. Xietain subconsciously felt proud of his younger sister and said with a faint smile, my little sister was the one who drew the runes and it was me who forged every piece of equipment on my body. Looks like the whole Bai family is talented then? Seraphina was a bit at a loss for words. She was currently sitting on one of the two small armchairs as her legs felt weak as a result of all the shocks she had received in such a short time. Xietain simply chuckled without commenting on it. Even though his mother was just a weak soul evolver who wanted nothing more than to be a good housewife and keep everything comfortable for her family, that would change as soon as he returned and had some free time. Even though these runes aren't as good as the ones I can encrypt, they're actually not that bad when you look at all the equipment as a single set, Callie said suddenly, interrupting the conversation that had just ended. She sat with her back straight against the back of her wheelchair and asked, "Do you want me to remove those runes for you and draw others?" "I can do that if you ask me to, although it will take me 3 days to finish the whole job." After considering for a moment, Xietain shook his head and partially refused. "Callie, I will keep my equipment like this for now. However, I would like to ask for your help to help me draw runes on my weapon," he said. Just like Callie had said, the runes that Meng Qi had drawn for him might not be of the best quality, but when each piece of equipment was put together they formed a truly impressive set in Xietan's eyes. Considering that he had barely lost any mobility despite wearing a full set of plate armor, the value of this equipment was too high for Xietain to be willing to separate himself from it. In video game terms, Xietain was practically a monster with the defense of a tank, the strength of a physical warrior, the ghostly agility of an assassin, and the magic power of a mage. He also did not lack the options to perform ranged physical attacks to match an archer. Except for self-healing, Xietain literally was a practically perfect combination of every possible combat style. "Let me see your weapon first." Callie nodded without questioning his choice too much. Xietain looked at the surroundings and hesitated a bit. If he pulled out his Crimson Thunder Dragon's last words here, wouldn't this house end up collapsing? His greatsword weighed over 6 tons and the magic power surrounding it was not small considering that a second-order soul stone powered its core. Just as that question was going through his head, Xietain laughed at himself as he remembered that the owner of this house was the little porcelain doll in front of him, a little monster packed with talent and mysteries. "Okay." Xietain nodded and took a step back before extending his hand forward. His spatial storage ring faintly glowed and an instant later the muscles in his right arm swelled as he felt the sudden large increase in weight. The interior of the small room immediately became slightly noisy and bright as red lightning flashed around the blade of the sword stopping just below the guard. Seraphina looked at Xietan's greatsword with surprise even though she had already seen it several times while they were in the northeast fighting other kingdoms. She still could not understand how an existence that had been evolving for a little over half a year not only possessed such a senseless combat ability but was even capable of forging armaments, comparable to her father's spear. The existence of Xietain was an unsolved mystery even when he stood in front of her for her to see. It was as if what Seraphina was seeing was nothing more than the outer shell of the apple. Even Callie was a bit surprised when she held out her hand and the records of the weapon flashed for her. "This weapon is very good, it's even better than Seraphina's spirit scepter," she said in an emotionless voice. The fact that Xietan's weapon was better than the weapon of an important princess like Seraphina spoke enough, but the fact that this weapon was forged by himself and with so little time hammering added many more details capable of driving anyone crazy. Xietain looked at his precious sidekick with appreciation as he said slightly proudly, "This great sword is my pride as a blacksmith. Although I now have better materials than before, I am not confident in my ability to forge a better weapon than this one in a short period of time." Callie nodded. Materials are certainly of utmost importance but one's skill is as well. Furthermore, sometimes miracles can happen when the smith is enlightened during the forging process so that even using poor quality materials a piece worthy of appreciation could be born. "I guess you were lucky." To Callie's surprise, Xietain actually nodded. "Indeed, I was very lucky back then." "That's a bit surprising," she said though her words again did not reflect in her expression. "What's that?" He looked at her in confusion. "I thought you were too proud to admit your luck. But I'm glad it was a misinterpretation of you on my part, now I feel more assured to follow you," Callie said calmly. "I am proud but I am not blinded by my pride." Xietain shrugged his shoulders and said casually, "If I was lucky then I was lucky. The truth does not offend me and lying to myself is meaningless since deep in my heart I will know that I am lying to myself." When he said those words, for a small fraction of a second, Xietain thought he saw the corner of Callie's lips lift slightly in a faint smile. However, he wasn't too sure as when he looked again and in less than a blink of time the expression on her face reflected no emotions at all. "Very well, I'll take care of your weapon," she said with a slight nod. "Tell me what kind of runes you want me to draw for you." "This." Xietain blinked and scratched his head a little embarrassed. "Callie, I'm afraid I don't know anything about runes, not even a little bit about it. Could you be a little sharper?" Physical attack runes, physical defense runes, boost runes, attack speed runes, magical attack runes, magical defense runes, cooldown runes, curse runes, holy runes, reduction runes, suppression runes. Callie named at least 50 types of runes before stopping. She kept her face fixed on him and said calmly, I can draw any rune you want. This. Xietain was really lost in the field of magical runes. He had tried to learn in the past, but it seemed that his talent was really pitiful in this field. Even when Mengqi tried to help him, it was all a waste of time, because Xietain simply wasn't able to learn even 3 continuous traces. After a moment of silence, his expression became serious and he asked, Callie, what runes do you suggest? I don't know much about this. I think you will be able to bring out the full potential from it, so I prefer to leave it in your hands. Callie nodded indifferently and asked calmly, in that case, could you tell me what your class is called first? I have an idea of your combat style after seeing the options of your equipment and figuring out the type of weapon you chose as your primary, but just to be sure. Blood Berserker. Xietain revealed it without bothering to hide it. Basically, you're battle-crazed. As expected of an orc. Seraphina said from the side. Xietain gave her a sidelong glance before turning to look at Callie. Ponytails, you're asking for it. Seraphina secretly stuck her tongue out at him before chuckling to herself. Callie nodded again and continued, what about your second class? I'm still in the first order. Callie was silent before she nodded slightly. Right, I had forgotten that Seraphina had told me about it earlier. You really are an anomaly, Bullet. Thank you, Powder. Xietain didn't know if he was being praised or not at this point. In that case, what is the class you chose for your second order? She rephrased her previous question and explained why. Surely you must not be far from entering the second order, therefore. I want to make sure I choose the right runes not only for today but also for tomorrow. My runes are different from your younger sisters, they cannot be removed once drawn. That's why we better make sure we don't make a weapon that needs to be thrown in the trash tomorrow. Makes sense. Xietain nodded and subconsciously glanced at Lilith out of the corner of his eye in search of her opinion. Tell her. Lilith nodded after a moment's hesitation. Xietain looked at Callie and said in a serious voice, Blood Mystic. Mystic? Seraphina jumped to her feet and said dumbfounded, aren't mystics a type of mage too? But, you're a warrior aren't you? A warrior and a mage were like sand and snow, completely different in every way. The only person Seraphina had ever seen in her life use a bit of magic despite being a warrior was her older sister Ellis, the first princess of Gales. However, this was because Ellis' class was literally magic warrior. As for the blood mystic job, other than the word blood there didn't seem to be anything to associate it with the blood berserker job. Did you forget how I killed the demons that day? Xietain pointed out. My magic is no weaker than my physical strength, that's why my second job will be blood mystic. Remembering how the demons exploded into a blood mist and those crimson chains that restricted the movements of the third order demons, Seraphina realized that subconsciously she had been suppressing Xietan's real power. She did this so as not to feel that the distance between the two was as colossal as it really was, but now that reality had hit her, she subconsciously clenched her fists realizing that she needed to work much, much harder or she would be left behind with no possibility of any way for her to make a comeback ever. As a princess and as one of the brightest talents in the history of her world, Seraphina was naturally an existence that had its own pride, a very big one at that. Therefore, she felt that she could not lose too much to the one who could perhaps be her future husband someday. Destructive mage and destructive warrior then. Callie's voice drew the duo's attention again. She focused on Xietain and said confidently, leave me your weapon and come back in 2 days, I'll see what I can do. Although she said she was going to see what she could do, the confidence in her usually monotone voice told Xietain that 2 days later he would undoubtedly receive a big surprise. Before leaving, Xietain lent Callie his work table and chisel as they were of better quality than the ones Seraphina had given her even if those were from the castle. However, just as Xietain was leaving the small dark room in which Callie worked, her voice sounded behind him. Bullet, do you have a third order soul stone? What? Xietain looked at her in shock as he turned around. Sitting in her wheelchair in front of the work table, she looked at him and said slowly, I will upgrade the magic power core in the process. This will be my greatest creation to this day, I'm sure of it. Chapter 848 6-year time limit troubled future. On the way back to the castle, Xietain and Seraphina again covered their bodies with those big cloaks in order not to draw too much attention on themselves. Different from Earth, the average level of humans in Eventide world was higher and most of them had 1 or 2 skills either active or passive apart from the skills one could easily learn such as cooking or mechanic. Therefore, it was easier to be caught upon activating a stealth skill, not to mention the fact that to avoid trouble it was forbidden the activation of skills such as invisibility. If a soul evolver was caught using invisibility by the defensive systems of the city or by a guard, then they would be locked up and interrogated until their innocence was proven. After all, why would a person hide inside the city where there were no enemies? For the first few minutes, Xietain and Seraphina were silent almost throughout. However, when they were approaching the mountain where the castle had been built and the number of people around them started to become fewer, Seraphina asked a question that took Xietain slightly by surprise. "Orc, will you really take Callie with you? I mean, to your world?" After a short pause, Xietain replied, "That's right. Actually, Callie is too important to me, and the closer I can have her the better. Of course, I didn't expect her to make such a request either, and I would never have forced her to do something she didn't want or taken her by force." Seraphina seemed to hesitate for a moment before she asked in a low voice, "Is Callie important to you because of her ability to see people's souls?" "That's about right. Even if Callie decides to never draw runes ever again, just her ability to see souls as well as her analytical capabilities are two characteristics more than enough to make her an indispensable existence in my eyes," Xietain said in a serious voice. After about 2 or 3 minutes of silence, Seraphina resumed asking more questions. "Why is Callie's ability to see souls so important to you?" she questioned in confusion. "I understand that your soul is different. I also know that you gained something good after hearing the words Callie spoke regarding the electromagnetic spectrum or whatever it's called. But, I don't understand how anyone could benefit just by knowing the color of souls." Seraphina had heard the same words Xietain had heard when Callie spoke, even Lilith was no different. However, the only one who learned the skill soul manipulation was Xietain. Xietain stopped his steps, causing Seraphina to stop as well. "When I said that Callie was the powder that fired the bullet, I wasn't lying," he said and sighed. "Seraphina, I wasn't lying either when I said that my name and Callie's name would one day in the future be heard far and wide across the universe." Seraphina shook her head. "Are you crazy? The universe? Who knows how many worlds are out there? If all goes according to my estimates and plans, you will be hearing from me in a few years after I return to my world," Xietain said, resuming his steps again. He knew she wouldn't understand even if he explained it 1,000 times. The only way Seraphina would be able to understand the magnitude of Xietan's goals was by knowing of Lilith's existence and learning about the higher existences. However, she did not need to know things that would probably do her more harm than good. Ironically, he came to understand that sometimes knowing too much was not good depending on the circumstances. Seraphina stared at his back for a few seconds before following him. She quickened her steps until she caught up with him and asked hurriedly, "Okay, let's say that what you say really happens and let's leave aside the reason why Callie is so important to you or why it is so amazing that she can see the color of souls or the use of such a thing for you. This is the question now, how will you go about bringing her into your world with you?" "I will simply hold Callie and walk through the portal with her after I activate the title skill that allowed me to open a portal to get to Eventide World." Xietain answered casually. Taking Callie to Earth was never really an obstacle for him. "That's..." Seraphina frowned under her cloak, realizing that she had actually assumed on her own that Xietain would simply be teleported to his world and subconsciously believing that no one could follow him. Her next words, however, came as a real shock to Xietain. "If I asked you to take me with you, what would your answer be?" "What?" He stopped abruptly and turned to look at her with wide eyes. Seraphina looked around, and realizing that the two of them were already halfway up the mountain with no one around, she removed the hood that covered her face. Xietain did the same after making sure there were no citizens nearby and asked dumbfounded, "Why would you want to go to my world? You have everything here. Your father, your big sister, your friends, your life, everything is in Eventide World." Contrary to Callie who had no family or acquaintances or friends except for Seraphina, the little princess in front of him had everything in this world. Callie might not feel any special attachment to this land or its people, but Seraphina was definitely different. Seraphina's pink lips trembled as if she was about to burst into tears or as if she wanted to say something she didn't dare. She clenched her small fists and took a deep breath before saying in a serious voice, "I need you to answer me something in an honest way, please." Seeing her so serious, Xietain subconsciously wanted to refuse to answer her question as he felt a little worried. This was the first time he had seen the usually lively and cheerful ponytailed second princess this serious. However, seeing the slight pleading in her emerald eyes, he didn't have the heart to say no. "Go ahead. When you get back to your world, will you and I ever be able to meet again?" Seraphina stared into the black eyes of the guy 3 or 4 years older than her as if she didn't want to miss the slightest change in his expression. The question she had just asked him was very important to her, and depending on his answer would derive her next choices as well as actions. As for Xietain, he subconsciously breathed a sigh of relief in his heart after hearing the girl's question in front of him. Luckily, and she had not asked anything that would make things difficult for him. It seems that you still can't accept the fact that my name will shake the universe in the years to come, but that's okay too, let the actions speak and explain themselves. Xietain said with a smile. His expression then turned serious, regarding the matter of whether we will be able to meet again when I return to my world. Xietain purposely dragged out his next words and watched Seraphina's reactions carefully. He would have to be too dense and stupid not to finally understand what feelings the young princess had for him now that he saw her on the verge of tears and with her fists so tightly clenched that her bones creaked. Xietain could only pray to any entity that the feelings of the young girl for him were nothing more than those of a great friendship close to brotherhood, as it was the only thing that could make a human feel this pressured at the departure of another person apart from love. If it was before then, I wouldn't be able to return to Eventide World, probably. After all, the effect of the skill attached to my title is the opening of a portal to a random world with a higher chance of making me grow compared to my world at the time of the activation. Xietain said as if he hadn't noticed anything. He continued, however, things are different now. Seraphina's eyes that seemed to be on the verge of tears suddenly lit up brightly like stars in the sky. The spark of hope burned stronger than ever in her chest, suffocating her in the process. Does that mean we can see each other again? She asked, perhaps a little too eagerly, but she ignored it and let herself go. Xietain kept the same faint smile as before and nodded. I don't know when it will be. It will probably be a few years, or maybe it will be sooner than I expected, depending on many factors. However, it is a fact that we will meet again. After all, I have a much bigger plan for this world. Xietain added in his heart, but did not say it out loud to avoid confusing and overburdening the girl in front of him. That's enough for me. Seraphina nodded with a big smile, not only of relief but also of joy. The youngest princess of Gales couldn't tell if she was in love or not, but at the very least she was sure that she liked the person in front of her, since even if she had countless suitors none could make her feel as at ease as Xietain, and those people couldn't even keep her eyes on them for more than 2 seconds. Seraphina needed time to think and clear her own heart, therefore, although it would not be an easy task not to see him for a few years, at least it was better than not seeing him ever again. As for how many years at the very least Xietain estimated would have to pass before they would meet again, Seraphina didn't dare ask and only prayed that it wouldn't be too long. Returning to his room in the kingdom's castle, Xietain removed his armor before letting himself fall onto the bed and closing his eyes. A lot had happened in just one morning, and the worst was yet to come. He was really tired. He felt the mattress sink slightly, and soon that unmistakable scent of fresh roses that he loved so much covered him. Xietain did not need to open his eyes and instead simply caressed the soft hair of the small head resting on his chest. After several minutes, Lilith said in a soft voice, the existence of that little baby named Callie seems to be quite special. This is the first time I've met someone capable of seeing souls. Xietain hummed slightly. Lilith added, you will have a lot of problems because of that little baby, you know it too, don't you? He nodded. The higher existences will definitely go crazy to get that girl. She will become everyone's focus when your name begins to make itself known. There will definitely be disastrous wars unleashed and many worlds could be destroyed. But I guess you've already thought of all that on the way here, haven't you? After a long pause of almost 5 minutes, Lilith opened her previously closed eyes and gently moved to turn and look at the relaxed face of her beloved. She smiled and her heart filled with pride. Any lower existence that knew what a single higher existence represented would be scared to death at the thought of being hunted by one, but Xietain didn't even flinch at the knowledge of what the future held for him. I'm afraid that when that happens even the lazy leader of my faction won't be able to lay still. Lilith added. Xietain, that Callie girl's skill is tempting enough to wake Lucifer from his slumber. When that happens, the demonic army will probably be your enemy along with the other factions. It's okay, they can come to me. As long as you don't become my enemy, I don't care about the others. Lilith gently tapped his chin as punishment for his words. I'm serious, you can't underestimate any of the faction leaders, especially Lucifer. I don't know about the rest, but if I had to fight one of them, the last one I would choose would be the leader of the demonic army. I hope you guys don't need to fight. Xietain slowly opened his eyes and leaned forward, kissing her softly before letting himself fall once more. If he doesn't provoke me, I don't have any desire to bother him, he said calmly. Lilith would eventually leave the demonic army and join Xietan's transcendent faction. He didn't need to ask because it was an obvious fact. The problem was this. Would Lucifer be willing to let go of a talent as great as Lilith? Xietain wasn't so sure about that, but if the leader of the demonic army was someone stubborn, then But if Lucifer disrupts the peace of my loved ones or gives us problems, I'll be sure to send him into an eternal sleep from which he will never wake up. Xietain added coldly in his heart. On the top floor of the castle where the higher existences of the demonic army were staying, Lucifer was sleeping comfortably in his bed when his own sneeze woke him up. He lazily sat up in bed, causing the cotton ball of his hat to hit him in the face due to the movement. Lucifer pulled the cotton ball back and rubbed his eyes as he looked around. Damn, this daddy don't want trouble, but my trouble detecting allergy has gone off again. Big trouble. His mumble echoed in the quiet, dark room. Oh, well, let's go back to sleep. Soon, soft snoring was once again the melody that cloaked the surroundings in the dense blanket of darkness. Back in Gales, Xietain looked at the fifth and last message he received from the soul record after he learned soul manipulation. Just as Xietain expected, this message only signaled trouble for him. Big trouble. 6-year time limit? Fuck yourself. Xietain muttered to himself. Lilith looked at him in confusion and was about to ask what was going on when she saw Xietain get into the blankets. What are you doing? Xietain patted his pillow before resting his head. He closed his eyes and said in a flat voice, this daddy is going to sleep. The corner of Lilith's mouth twitched several times, but even before she could say anything, she noticed that Xietan's breathing had become steady. He had fallen asleep. In less than 10 seconds. Chapter 849 Soul Records Reasons, The Golden Domain, The Path of Thelmortal. 3 a.m. The two suns of Eventide World, one yellow and the other fiery red, hovered in the sky covered by a seemingly impregnable black layer. The mana clouds were no longer as dense as before since a good part of them had disappeared after the world absorbed them to strengthen its laws. However, the purple lightning still crackled fiercely and the mana tornadoes connecting the skies with the earth were still as dangerous as ever. Occasionally, the sound of explosions, caused by one or several attacks together, would pierce Bearcrest City's energy shields and reach the ears of the citizens sleeping comfortably in their homes, while the army's soul evolvers battled the out-of-control enemies. However, the only sound that could be heard in the magnificent castle of the royal family was the purple lightning that broke out from time to time high in the sky. Xietain looked at the beautiful woman sleeping beside him with a tenderness that probably only she had seen on his face. He knew Lilith's senses were sharp, therefore, he did his best not to move and instead focused on the fifth message of the soul record. That message he read in the middle of the day and which had drained all his will to stay awake for the rest of the day. Many years ago, this plane and all the secondary planes parallel to it were one with a different plane where the laws are many times higher. This single plane in existence was known by the name of the Golden Domain. Due to a conflict between the most powerful beings of the Golden Domain, countless powerhouses died and most of the earth disappeared without a trace after being swallowed by a huge spatial crack caused by powerful attacks. Those lands that broke away from the Golden Domain and disappeared without a trace are precisely the multiverses over which the soul record has control, the main and largest universe being the one where you were born. An involuntary sigh left Xietan's lips as he read this far. The message was really long. He had only reached the third part of the whole message at the most, but he didn't want to continue even though he had read it once during the day. Even though it was only a sigh, Lilith's thin and delicate brows furrowed as if she could feel his burdens while sleeping. Xietain caressed her hair lovingly for a full minute, finally making that frown disappear from the innocent face of the beauty beside him. Countless eras of silence passed. However, all peace must come to an end someday, and that is what happened when the powers of the Golden Domain found this place. Using the living beings of this lower plane as training grounds and taking back the treasures that in the past were the Golden Domain's wealth, they all became cattle. It was then when the soul record decided to push all living beings onto the path of evolution, to avoid destruction and major suffering. To avoid further suffering in the long run and the destruction. Now that Xietain had learned the reasons why the soul record did what it did, he realized that in reality, no existence had the qualifications to blame it for its actions, regardless of whether the soul record was a living being or was just a thing capable of making decisions. While it was true that countless lost their lives due to the mana and soul power that could be absorbed at the cost of another living being's life, this was the only way the soul record could build a force powerful enough to fight the beings of the Golden Domain. What the soul record wanted to accomplish was to use the lives of the weak to foster the strong. Only the strongest could be used as shields and swords to fight against terrifying existences, while the weaker ones would be killed without the existence of those shields and swords anyway. Was what the soul record was doing an honorable act? No, of course it was not. No matter how one put it, the fact that an unspeakable number of families had been destroyed was impossible to deny, as well as the fact that even more tears were shed due to the suffering and pain that each apocalypse triggered. However, was what the soul record was doing an evil act? At least in the eyes of Xietain, who so far at least had not lost a loved one, it was not. The path used by the powers of the Golden Domain is getting bigger and bigger, which allows a greater number of enemies to reach this plane, and at the same time those enemies are getting more and more powerful. You have received the optional quest, the Path of the Immortal. The Path of the Immortal, turn at least 50% of your mana into spiritual power as you increase your knowledge and control over your soul at the same time that you rise above all living beings in the multiverse. Reward for success, you will be allowed access to Enigma World. If you fail, the chances of 70% of the life in your universe disappearing are absolute. Time limit, 6 years. The soul record wishes you luck and silently supports you from the darkness. Xietain smiled bitterly and shook his head. Another involuntary sigh slipped from his lips as the green letters disappeared, and he stared with a helpless expression at the chandelier hanging from the ceiling. The soul record was asking him to become the most powerful being in the universe in only 6 years. Counting Xietan's evolution time so far, that would be the same as asking a level 0 human to become the most powerful being in the multiverse in approximately 6 years and 7 months. Chapter 850 Soul Manipulation, Awakened Soul. While Xietain was lost in his inner thoughts, Lilith's still sleepy voice brought him back to the real world. What could be so important as to make you sigh like that 2 times in a row? Xietain adjusted his posture a bit and drew her closer to him. After giving her a gentle kiss on the top of her head and while softly caressing her delicate bare shoulder, he replied in a calm voice, "It's nothing important, just my head thinking about what to do from here on. Go back to sleep, I'll follow you soon." Lilith did not insist and simply nodded prettily before closing her eyes again to immerse herself in the wonderful dreamland she had been away from for so long, but one that thanks to Xietain she was beginning to appreciate again. A minute later, Xietain felt Lilith's chest rise and fall rhythmically with her breathing. She had fallen asleep again. Xietain closed his eyes, but not to fall asleep, because he was trying to find answers to all the doubts he had. First, he organized all the information he had obtained in his mind, and the second thing he did after putting doubts with doubts and answers with answers was to put the matters regarding the Golden Domain to the back of his mind, since it was something he could not and would not come in contact with any time soon. He had learned the reason why the soul record pushed all living things onto the path of evolution. It was not something that occurred just by natural law but a necessity. At the same time, Xietain had also learned that the soul record was definitely a being, an entity, or a thing with self-awareness rather than a law. Laws had no consciousness or ability to reason or make decisions, they simply served a fixed purpose, just as was the law of gravity or the law of time. As to whether the soul record had a physical body that was machine-like, person-like, animal-like, rock-like, or even the universe itself, Xietain temporarily could not be sure about it. Xietain focused mainly on his doubts in order to try to clear up at least a little bit of as many unknowns as possible. First of all, he tried to understand what was the spiritual power that the mission, the Path of the Immortal, demanded of him. While it was true that Xietain had read many novels throughout his years as a student, and while it was true that the combination of the two words spiritual power was not new to him, since this was a type of energy mentioned quite often in cultivation-type novels, this was not very helpful in the real world, considering that Xietain could not sense any strange energy other than the mana that hovered in the air naturally. The word spiritual somehow had to be connected to soul/spirit, Xietain was certain of this fact. However, this was where Xietan's second unknown came in. How could he turn the mana in his soul into spiritual power? Since he could not answer that question at all with his current knowledge or information, what Xietain did was to look up the records of the skill soul manipulation, since it was precisely this skill that had been the trigger for everything. Soul manipulation, EX rank passive active skill, level 1, the soul is the essence of all life, and there can be no life without a soul. Life can be destroyed by anyone, but life can only be created by combining and subsequently manipulating the records that make up the souls of two existences. Currently unlocked effects are from the awakened soul phase. Passive effect, awakened soul. All spiritual attacks below the order of your soul become ineffective. Spiritual attacks above the order of your soul are weakened by 60% regardless of the number of different orders. Damaging your soul becomes much more difficult. Active effect, awakened soul. Once every 60 days, you can upgrade the order of up to 3 passive or active skills for a maximum of 5 hours. The skill goes on cooldown when it is activated, regardless of whether you keep its effect active for the currently set maximum time. Note, it does not work on skills that increase the user's knowledge in any field. If not for Xietain not wanting to wake Lilith up again and worry her, he would definitely have gasped heavily after reading the records of the soul manipulation skill. Xietain had no idea what a rank EX skill was, however, it was more than clear that these skills were even more powerful than unique skills. At level 1, the skill soul manipulation had not only strengthened Zeman's soul to the point where he was now able to use overlap regeneration more freely than before, but even granted him defense against the most dangerous type of attacks of all, spiritual attacks. However, what made Zeman's heart beat fiercely was the active effect. To be able to raise an entire order the power of 3 skills regardless of whether they were passive or active was simply insane. This trump card was simply colossal in the hands of a beast like Zeman who possessed terrifyingly powerful skills. Since the skills were part of the soul, runes engraved in the soul, it was reasonable that the skill soul manipulation would have such an ability. Moreover, this was only the first phase, the awakened soul phase, which meant that as Zeman raised the level of the skill soul manipulation, more and more effects would begin to appear. Even though he had not obtained any seemingly obvious or clear clues regarding the spiritual power, Zeman could not help but want to jump for joy. He quickly tried to see what the requirements for evolving soul manipulation were, but Zeman almost spat out 300 liters of old blood and died when he saw them. Soul manipulation's evolution requirements: 4th order blood manipulation, incomplete. 4th order gravity manipulation, incomplete. 4th order air manipulation, incomplete. 4th order light manipulation, incomplete. 4th order darkness manipulation, incomplete. 7th order soul stone, 0 out of 5. Zeman really wanted to stand up naked, step on the bed, point at the window, and scream at the whole world to go screw itself. 5 manipulation type skills? For the love of everything pure and impure in the universe. Zeman had barely managed to obtain 2 manipulation type skills during this more than half a year of so many battles to the death, and none of them was in the 4th order yet. Besides, 5 7th order soul stones. Even the most powerful existence Zeman knew of, Lilith, was a 6th order soul evolver. 7th order beings were existences on the level of the legendary archangels like Michael or Gabriel that were so prominently mentioned in the Bible. Not only did the evolution of soul manipulation demand that Zeman should get skills he had never heard of or seen, but it was even asking him that if he wanted to reach the next stage he would first have to defeat beings that were only one stage below beings like the biblical God himself or the legendary Xietain. If it wasn't for Lilith sleeping like an innocent and adorable little angel, Zeman would have really cursed even if he didn't know whether to curse the soul record or the skill and its stupid requirements. Fortunately, Zeman was a considerably rational person even if he was no longer able to keep his mind cool like a perfect combat machine as when he had the skill stone heart. After calming down, he finally realized a fact he had been ignoring. Yes, the skill soul manipulation had evolution requirements just like all the other skills. However, hadn't Zeman managed to evolve several of his skills by improving his own understanding of them? Maybe, if he could understand souls better, those requirements would disappear or at least become easier. With Kali's help, Zeman had managed to understand the composition of souls, which was probably the awakened soul stage he was currently in. In the future, with the help of the little porcelain doll, Zeman hoped to understand how each compound worked and how to break them down. By understanding the composition, Zeman gained the power to improve those compounds in the form of improving his skills. When he gained knowledge of how the compounds of the soul worked, Zeman was confident that he would be able to manipulate to some extent the soul's or at the very least his own. Finally, Zeman believed that decomposition was the last stage he needed to learn. In this stage, Zeman would probably be able to end the life of any living being just with a thought, and even if it wasn't that far-fetched he would definitely possess terrifying power. 6 years from now on. Zeman finally sighed for the last time before going to sleep. 2 days later. 2 days had passed since Zeman met the 15-year-old girl who completely changed the course of his life. In fact, to say that Kali changed Zeman's destiny was not an exaggeration at all, since if it were not for her, Zeman would not have come to understand the composition of souls, and therefore he would not have known that the universe was in imminent danger. Although 6 years was a long time in the eyes of a guy like Zeman who was barely 20 years old and had only been evolving for 7 months, the reality was that 6 years could no longer be considered a long time when it came to the almost total destruction of all life. Another proof that time was relative in the eyes of living beings and the circumstances around them. During the past 2 days, Zeman tried to help Lilith so that she could obtain the skill soul manipulation, but apparently, it was not as easy as searching through the internet for the location of the treasure already discovered by someone else in an online video game. However, Lilith told him that she would not give up and would continue trying to uncover it by her own means. In addition, because Zeman did not want to worry Lilith too much or make her feel bad about the short time he had to get ready, Zeman did not tell her about the golden domain. Forget about the mission, the path of the immortal. Zeman spent half of his time training with a mutant beast sinew to master the use of a whip. As for the other half of his time, Lilith simply looked at him in confusion as he sat like a monk cross-legged on a rock with his eyes closed. She had tried to tease him the first day, telling him if he was playing like the cultivators in the novels he used to read and often talked about. However, Lilith frowned in confusion when Xietain did not respond to her joke as he usually would and instead stayed serious and focused on his task. This made her suspect that he was hiding something from her, but it still wasn't enough to be sure, therefore, she continued observing him closely with more attention than before. Except for 4 hours of sleep and his 3 main meals a day, Xietain only trained to master the whip and tried to understand his own soul better in search of the so-called spiritual power. Since his soul was the total result of the 7 types of souls, if Xietain could understand his soul then understanding the others would be a simple task. Sitting on the same rock he had been sitting on every time for meditation, Xietain let out a frustrated sigh before opening his eyes and slowly standing up under Seraphina's curious eyes. "Orc, you've been sitting there for 4 hours straight doing nothing," she said with a weird expression. "If you didn't wake up soon I was considering throwing a bucket of ice water on you." "Sorry for the wait, ponytails." Xietain jumped off the rock and started walking south. "Let's go, Callie should be almost done by now." Seraphina rolled her eyes and muttered under her breath, "It's only 8 in the morning, I don't think Callie will be done too soon." Even as she muttered, the youngest princess of the Gale's kingdom followed him obediently. Arriving at Callie's house, the two quietly entered and headed straight to the small room she used to work with her runes. There, Xietain gaped at the little porcelain doll drawing with her delicate hands, and for the first time, he felt that a person's movements could be so refined. Every movement she made was packed with elegance and beauty capable of captivating anyone.